To truly understand the depth of the JFK assassination mystery, we need to delve deeper into the context of the era, the key figures involved, and the subsequent investigations that have both clarified and clouded our understanding. The early 1960s were a time of profound change and tension in the United States. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum, the Cold War was at its peak, and the Cuban Missile Crisis had brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. John F. Kennedy, with his vision of a new frontier, sought to navigate these turbulent waters with a combination of idealism and pragmatism. Kennedy's administration was marked by its youthful energy and intellectual vigor. His inner circle, often referred to as the best and the brightest, included his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy, and Secretary of State Dean Rusk. Together, they shaped policies that would leave a lasting impact on the nation and the world. Two key events defined Kennedy's presidency and set the stage for his assassination. The Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, a failed attempt to overthrow Fidel Castro in Cuba, was a humiliating setback for the administration. It fostered deep mistrust between Kennedy and the CIA, and some believe it sowed the seeds of conspiracy. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 brought the world perilously close to nuclear war. Kennedy's firm but measured response averted disaster, but it also heightened tensions with the Soviet Union and their allies. The crisis underscored the fragility of global peace and the high stakes of Cold War diplomacy. Kennedy's handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis was a triumph of diplomacy, but it also made him many enemies, both domestically and internationally. The tension between his administration and the intelligence community was palpable. The Bay of Pigs debacle was a turning point. Kennedy felt betrayed by the CIA, and his subsequent efforts to reform the agency likely fueled animosity. These conflicts provide a fertile ground for conspiracy theories. Lee Harvey Oswald, the man accused of assassinating Kennedy, was an enigma himself. A former Marine who defected to the Soviet Union and later returned to the United States, Oswald's life was marked by radical beliefs and erratic behavior. His connections to pro-Cuban and communist organizations added layers of complexity to his profile. Oswald's movements in the months before the assassination have been scrutinized extensively. His time in New Orleans, where he interacted with pro-Castro activists, and his brief trip to Mexico City, where he reportedly visited the Cuban and Soviet embassies, have fueled speculation about his motives and potential accomplices. Oswald exhibited signs of deep-seated frustration and a desire for recognition. His defection to the Soviet Union and subsequent disillusionment suggest a man struggling with identity and purpose. These factors could have driven him to seek notoriety through a dramatic act. Oswald's connections to various political groups complicate the narrative. While he may have acted alone, his affiliations raise the possibility of external influences or support. The assassination itself was captured in one of the most analyzed pieces of footage in history, the Zapruder film. This 26-second home movie, filmed by Abraham Zapruder, provides a harrowing real-time account of the shooting. It has been scrutinized frame by frame in an attempt to understand the trajectory of the bullets and the precise sequence of events. The Warren Commission, established by President Johnson, set out to uncover the truth behind the assassination. Over the course of 10 months, the commission interviewed hundreds of witnesses, examined physical evidence, and compiled an exhaustive report. Its conclusion? Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, and the shots that killed Kennedy and wounded Texas Governor John Connally were fired from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. The commission's findings, however, did little to quell public skepticism. The single bullet theory, which posited that one bullet caused multiple wounds in both Kennedy and Connally, was met with widespread disbelief. Critics argued that the theory defied logic and physics, pointing to discrepancies in the evidence and eyewitness testimonies. In the years that followed, additional investigations sought to uncover new evidence and reevaluate the commission's conclusions. The House Select Committee on Assassinations, convened in the 1970s, concluded that Kennedy's assassination was likely the result of a conspiracy, though it stopped short of identifying specific individuals or groups involved. The House Select Committee on Assassinations brought to light significant issues with the Warren Commission's findings. Acoustic evidence suggested the presence of multiple gunmen, and numerous witnesses reported hearing shots from the grassy knoll, not just the depository. Despite these revelations, the lack of conclusive evidence has left the door open for endless speculation. The secrecy surrounding classified documents only adds to the mystery and fuels conspiracy theories. In recent years, advancements in technology have provided new tools to re-examine the evidence. Digital reconstructions and simulations offer fresh perspectives on the events of that day, while forensic analysis reinterprets old clues. These efforts continue to shed light on the assassination, but the core questions remain elusive. Modern technology allows us to analyze the evidence in ways that were not possible in the 1960s. We've gained new insights into the ballistics, the trajectory of the bullets, and the medical evidence. Yet even with these advancements, definitive answers remain out of reach. The enduring mystery of JFK's assassination speaks to the complexities of history. It's a puzzle with pieces that may never fully fit together, leaving us to grapple with multiple plausible scenarios and the inherent uncertainty of the past. The assassination of John F. Kennedy continues to spark curiosity and debate across generations. It stands as a somber reminder of the fragility of democracy, the dark undercurrents of political power, and the enduring quest for truth in the face of uncertainty. Dealey Plaza, once a scene of unspeakable tragedy, now serves as a place of reflection and inquiry. The sixth-floor museum at Dealey Plaza offers a comprehensive look at the events of November 22, 1963, and the myriad investigations that followed. It is a space where history and mystery intersect, inviting visitors to ponder the questions that remain. The allure of the JFK assassination mystery lies in its complexity. A young, vibrant leader cut down in his prime, a nation left to grapple with the loss, and the tantalizing possibility that the truth is still out there, waiting to be uncovered. Was it a lone gunman, driven by a twisted ideology? Or was it a meticulously orchestrated conspiracy designed to alter the course of history? Countless books have been written, documentaries produced, and lectures delivered, each offering a different perspective, a new piece of the puzzle. The search for answers is a journey that continues to inspire and challenge. So, what do you believe? Was it the work of a lone gunman, a man with a grudge and a rifle? Or was it something far more complex, a web of intrigue woven by unseen hands? The answers may never be fully known, but the questions remain as compelling as ever. Join the discussion, share your thoughts, and let's delve into the enigma together. Because sometimes, the mystery is what keeps the story alive.